So let me tell you what I found underneath my Christmas tree. You remember that one hoe? No, I'm kidding. There's no hoe. Welcome back, ladies and
Change the
gentlemen.
subject.
Let me tell you, she was a naughty. No, man, I'm kidding. Welcome back, everybody. I'm your host, Glenn Lawrence, and this is
Shah McCool.
And most people think they understand child support, but they don't. All right. They understand the slogan, they understand the rage clips, they understand the pain, but they don't understand how the system actually works. Who sets the numbers? Why people fall behind? Or what incentivizes quietly drives the outcome. And that's where we are going to be breaking that down today.
Yeah, because once a child is involved, we have to remember that the conversation stops being about a theory and it's more about, like, people tend to want to make it about winning the argument, like being right. And that's not what it's about. Unfortunately, the whole system, uses the money and the time and the access and everything just like kind of erodes. So it's definitely today's guests, we are definitely going to be getting into inside the system, and we're going to be talking about what people argue and why things are not getting solved.
Exactly. So you ready?
Yes, let's go.
Let's do it.
Energy of truth on fire. They're calling out the world's desire. From fake ideals to moral decay, they're lighting up the modern age. No one's safe, not the church, not fame. They're flipping the script, rewriting.
Tips goes like me at a child support agency. We had these things called performance measures, and these are federal performance measures. So federal money, taxpayer dollars, is going out to the state and saying, here's millions of dollars for you to give out for welfare. Now we're going to grade you on how much of that money that you collect back in the form of child support from fathers who aren't in the house or don't have custody of their children. So we would have these like federal performance measures. One of them was establishing court orders. How many orders did you establish? How much paternity did you establish? That was one of them. How much child support did you collect? How much arrears did you collect? What was your cost efficiency in terms of running the agency versus how much, you collected on the back end? And if you look at it, the way these work based off how you perform, you get bigger incentive payments from the federal government, right? So the government and the courts have these incentives to get as many orders as they can to establish paternity, which doesn't mean following up on biological truth. It means having a person's name associated with the child on paper, is these numbers go up, and then they get more incentive payments from the federal government, which some of it goes into the state general fund, which can be used for other things and all this kind of stuff. So it's kind of built in that way. And, a lot of it is about wealth transference. I think a lot of this probably rolls into discussions about feminism and things like that. And in the 90s, this whole push for women can do anything. I think a lot of that was to get women off of welfare in order to get them as productive money-making citizens. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, give them welfare now. They did TANF because it used to be you could just live off welfare even as an adult.
Yeah.
Then in the mid-90s, it went from AFDC, aid to families with dependent children, to TANF, which was temporary aid to needy families. And then the parents were supposed to be limited to 2 years, and then the children could be on it for a full 18-year cycle, basically. And sometimes you'll see people having kids to try to catch this as it ends, but that's another thing. And it was supposed to be about, okay, the Republicans and the Democrats reached across the aisle and they shook hands and they figured this out. But all it did was make like this really strong child support system, which was modeled off of the IRS, basically. That's literally what it was like. They wanted it to have that much power, and it really hasn't solved the issue. I'll say this. I mean, it's worse than ever. It's not like families are getting back together.
Yeah.
It used to be child support from the federal side was just about working on cases from welfare. But then what happened is they started giving incentive payments to states to say, hey, start advertising your services to families that are not on welfare. And the idea was supposed to be that, well, you're going to stop people from slipping into welfare if you can get to them first. But if you look at studies, there are some good papers written on like the effects of child support enforcement, especially on poor and needy families. It tends to have like a negative effect. It'll kill the relationship between the father and the child. Because, especially if they can't make the payments, then they stop seeing their kid altogether. and then it's just this guy who owes money in the system, and he just lives under the table, and
now he's called a deadbeat.
now he's a deadbeat. Yeah, yeah. Back then, when deadbeat dad came along, back then they had the welfare queen and the deadbeat dad, and these were words that were in the cultural mythos at the time. But basically, in my opinion, I think a lot of these changes that we did to the law just enabled people to make different decisions that aren't exactly like family, creating and sustaining, right? So all of that stuff really pushed us, I think, into the world that we live in now. And now, and of course, around the same time, well, in the late 60s, we used to have at fault divorce, and then that got moved into no fault.
Yeah.
So it's just like a recipe for disaster. And then, now you have things like the manosphere and the red pill that are finally, after enough damage has been done, they're trying to figure out what do we do about this now.
Well, see, that kind of brings me up to a good question here. So, because I would say that, and I'm probably going to detour a little bit here, but would you say, I believe that the child support division is not about children at all. I think they use the child. We're here on the benefit of the child. We want to make sure that the child has money, but how
interest
actually
of the child.
Yeah, but like you don't get money if you are not taking something off of what's being brought in. So let's say if the dad is having to pay $500 a month child support, if you are taking that 500 from dad and giving it straight 500 to mom for the child, you have not, all the work that you guys are doing is not generating any revenue. So there has to be a cut. The child support agency has to be capitalizing on like the middleman fee or the cut from somewhere in order to continue operating.
Let me tell you this. Okay, so you remember how I said child support went from just helping welfare cases to non-welfare cases?
Yeah.
Who do you think it's easier to collect money from? Welfare
People
or
with money.
non-welfare cases?
Non-welfare.
People with money. Yeah, so if you're non-welfare, you have an above-the-table job. My job as a child support officer is, if this guy is a normal, hardworking, good, upstanding citizen, all I got to do is just send a wage assignment to his job, and the money comes in. I never have to look at the case again. But for the welfare cases, those are the ones I got to try making calls on, and hopefully, we could get some payments, and I got to sit here and try to discuss these guys and give them incentives to pay, or they'll just never answer the phones. So most of the money we collect, which feeds into these performance measures, right, which leads to incentive payments back to states, are actually coming from these welfare cases. Or what I'm saying is like bigger amounts. Like, so if a guy has a good job and you apply the child support calculator to it, you're going to get a higher child support amount, right? So now we collected $2,500 from this guy, and that money is going to go to our performance measures versus like a $400 or $250 child support amount from somebody that's a welfare family, and us not getting the money. So at the end of the day, it really looks like we're doing a great job because we're harassing normal middle-class American families for money.
Basically, you're punishing the fathers that are capable, that have jobs, and that are basically responsible. They are basically having to carry the burden for the fathers that are not, because you're collecting so much money from them in a way to offset the money that you're not collecting, right?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. So exactly, right? Because then it's buffering up the number. So if you look at child support and how much it used to collect, the graph looks really good. Like, oh, we'd have our end of year thing. We collected this much money this year. Let's all pat ourselves on the back. We had a great fiscal year. If you look at the history of it, you can see that those changes really help to buffer the bottom line dollar amount of how much money is collected, and they would rather you pay through the system. So it shows that way. There's a lot of different pots where money falls in and all this kind of stuff. There's good retrospectives written on the whole process that are congressional that, you can read and stuff. And it shows kind of what percentages are incentive payments, what percentages are used to sustain certain programs and where they go. But the state has a big incentive to do that. And I feel like we're kind of in this trap place where if you took away the the whole welfare system tomorrow, you would end up with a lot of people on the streets. So we're kind of paying a lot of people to stay out of our way, even though there has been an uptick in homelessness lately, but at least from what I see. So it's just, we are like deep into the weeds on this system, and we have taken away, what I would argue is that we have taken away families' ability to self-regulate reproduction for themselves and put it in the hands of the state. And so people aren't really incentivized to stay together in the same way anymore that they used to be.
What's up, guys? Jen McCool here. I am holding one of the brand new flavors from First Form, the maple butter. And this is what I use every single morning. It is by far the best products. And I've tried a lot of products in the market. First Form, 100% third party tested. And on top of that, they taste amazing and they're great for you. So if you haven't tried it, definitely do so. I've added my link down below. The best flavor. I use this in my pancakes in the morning. I also do it in my yogurt. So there's so many ways that you can put the level 1. And of course, I do try the formula one, which is more of an isolate protein. But if you're looking for a way that tastes amazing and doesn't give you all the bloat and all the nonsense that you deal with other protein powders, this is it. Check it out and let me know. I'm going to add a link. If you grab it, make sure you let me know and I'll send you a little free gift.
And I guess like real quick, I wanted to ask, because I know you're big on dowries and bride price. That was the other thing I wanted to get in with you.
Yeah.
Do you think the fact that we as a nation and a culture have moved away from that practice?
I would say so. Yeah, I think so. That would be
plays
true.
a huge role in like the overall outcome of the failure of marriages.
Absolutely. Those marriage transactions, that's the umbrella term, has that, in my opinion, that is a regulator on hypergamy. Okay. And what we did is we switched the marriage of reason, as they used to call it, to what's called the love match or a marriage of passion. So you substituted the romantic ethos as the driving force for matchmaking instead of the endowments from the family, property, and all these kinds of other consideration that, truth be told, and this includes the West, people used to look at when they created matches for people. I mean, I'm talking going all the way back to 2,000 years ago. I mean, ancient Athens did this, and then it slowly spread to all of Europe as time went on. But yeah, if I was going to give you a brief, what happened is that when I stopped working at child support, I started looking deeply into the history of child support, more so than I ever did while I was on the job. Because I was just like, how did we get here? And it's just like, I just kept looking and going back and back and back. And I went back so far, even to like Hammurabi's Code, and I kept seeing the mention of this bride price and dowry stuff, and eventually it revealed itself to me. I'm like, what is this? So I decided to do like a deep dive into that, and I looked at every single paper I can find or get my hands on or book. I got a bunch of newspaper clippings from back in the day, and I discovered that fundamentally this was like a support, or essentially the ground of how we did marriage in our society. And I would say the West was built on the dowry system. And once you remove that, it led to kind of where we're at now, where marriage is just a disaster.
How can you give like a little brief for the listeners that have nowhere like to come? Like when you say how long ago it was, how long was it? And then like where are we today? How has that affected it?
Sure. Like, and just to clarify, do you mean like how long ago it used to be
the dowry
practiced?
system was removed?
Okay.
Yeah, like when was it in practice and when did it fall out of practice?
So the epicenter of where it started to get removed was in England and the US. Okay. And this is because industrialization and modernization hit them first, because back when we were like mostly agrarian, it's not like you're going to be like, screw you, mom and dad, we're going to go live in this $500 a month apartment over here, and I'm going to go get a job, and her and I love each other, and screw you guys. Like you actually had to set up the household properly, and so this required a wealth transference at the time of marriage in order to set up a new household, in order to have a successful marriage. Okay. And you know how you always hear, like feminists might say, well, women never inherited. The sons only got the inheritance. That's not true. Women got their inheritance as the dowry. It's just that they have their inheritance pre-mortem at the time of marriage, and then the son gets his inheritance on the back end. So this gives the family a couple boosts. But around industrialization and modernization, things started to change. Culture started to change. You had the printing press. You had romantic novels going out. You had people making money in a different way where they can afford to finance love, essentially. And this, and I have like a lot of newspaper articles where it's like English people are debating, should we go back to the dowry system? And they'll look over at the French, and the French are still doing the dowry. They didn't get rid of dowry till the 1960s, where the English started moving away in the 1800s, pretty much. Like in the 1700s, they're still doing it, and then things start to change for them in the 1800s. It's still happening on some level, but then the culture's starting to change. And then things like chivalry, it starts to become not chivalrous for a man to expect a dowry from his woman, or from his future wife, you know, or whatever, his betrothed. And he would just pay for everything. And then you start to see stuff in discussions about how people know love matches end in just a lot of arguments and fighting once the real world really hits them, or the husband's resentful that, like, oh, the wife didn't bring in anything and all this stuff. With the US, from the inception of the US, when they broke off for the Church of England,
Mhm.
they allowed divorce. So it's kind of funny because divorce was sort of born with the US.
Yeah.
You know? And back then, for most of, you know, Christian Europe, there was no divorce. There was annulments, you know, so you would
Annulments
go
to
to the
the
ecclesiastical court, and there were reasons to get an annulment. Maybe there wasn't consent, or there was a consanguinity that was within a degree that wasn't allowable, or insanity. So the reason wasn't that in consent. And there were just reasons for that. You know, maybe they're married to somebody else. So for a long time, from the Roman handoff, from the Roman period to the Christian period, there was no divorce, just annulments. And prior to that, there was divorce in, you know, the Roman
Yeah.
times and all that. Divorce was a normal part of,
Even back in biblical times, there was divorce.
yeah, there was. I mean, that was, it wasn't like this end all be all. But then, you know, like as time goes on and as Christianity goes from being a sect to being the state religion, you know,
Mhm.
officially of the empire, management of things started to change. And, you know, that's when you started seeing a move away from polygyny towards monogamy and all these kinds of things. And so England and the US, it starts to move away there. The US starts off like this, and that's how we get our at-fault divorce system. Because basically the US is like, we're going to allow divorce, and it's like, we haven't had divorce in our civilization for 2,000 years. How are we supposed to do this?
Yeah.
So that's how we got our at-fault divorce system, which then went away in the late 60s. Well, it started to. I mean, it was just California in the late 60s. And then you got no-fault divorce, which has been a disaster. But what happened is dowry used to regulate hypergamy, because women that had a appropriately sized dowry would match with men that had a good potential future, or they had a good income, or they were going to have a good inheritance, or both. So when the
Okay.
bargain would happen between families, they would say, you know, this is our son or daughter wants this. Our daughter wants to get married. This is their marriage portion. It's another word for the daughter, or for the dowry. And the matchmakers and stuff like this would pretty much, there would be this marriage negotiation up front. Then when the match was made, the household would be established based off of that. And then the man steps into his role of being the provider and all this kinds of stuff. And all that makes sense. The dowry was always the woman's property. But it was under the management of the man in a coverture world,
Yeah.
right? Then it
Yep.
was like the Married Women's Property Act in the mid 1800s or early 1800s in England that finally said, oh no, a woman's property is her property. So what that did is that made it so the man didn't have usufruct over her dowry anymore.
Mhm.
Meaning that if she brought as dowry some type of account that has a, you know, some whatever amount that comes out of it, or land that has a harvest every year, the husband manages that amount and can use that amount of money for whatever. Or her family says, okay, this guy has trained as an artisan, we're going to pay for his shop, you know, and now he's going to run the shop and support the family. And, you know, that was the dowry. So there's all these things for
So
the way
what
that it
I'm
works. So that,
hearing,
yeah.
what I'm hearing is, in a nutshell, is that basically when feminism was introduced, which was the 1820s,
hmm
that's where the system started
Feminism's
to erode.
They hate dowry. Yeah. I even have
Okay.
some, so I'm sorry, my mind's going to so many places, but essentially hypergamy was regulated that way.
It was
Okay.
a buffer. It was a buffer for hypergamy.
It was
What
a
you're
check
saying.
on hypergamy.
Yeah.
And then once we removed the dowry, we said, okay, we have at-fault divorce now. At-fault divorce is a way of saying we're going to allow open hypergamy. So these people can marry each other because they love each other. She doesn't bring anything but the clothes on her back, also called the pauper marriage. This guy's Mr. Hero over here, and he's going to, I got all the money, baby, don't worry about me. And you at least had at-fault, which was like, okay, these two are going to get married. Here's how it works, though, okay? So If you cheat, if somebody is at fault, and let's say she cheats
That's
on
the
him,
injured party. That's the one that breaches the contract.
yeah, she breaches the contract. He's the injured party. We're not going to, custody is going to go to him first. The
Yep.
assets of the marriage are going to stay with him, and then fine, they're divorced after that. If he did it, then it's going to be the other way around. Whatever. Then when you pulled out that card, and now you were left with no fault divorce. Now you have open hypergamy with people getting married,
With
and at
no
any moment,
consequence.
yeah, because what you have is the establishment of this community property that says it doesn't matter who brought what. This is the community property of the marriage, and you can divorce unilaterally. It doesn't matter who did what. Now we're in an amoral system, right? Morality has been removed
Yeah.
completely.
If you look like this and you happen to be struggling with women, and if you like bubble baths and some other gay stuff, it's probably because you use body wash like Metro by Resto Chesto, the most anti-masculine body wash in the world. So if you're tired of being confused for a homo, then I suggest that you use Tactical Soap from Grondike Soap Company. It's a game changer. That's right, a natural pheromone soap that enhances alpha status, masculinity, attractiveness, and charisma. Only Tactical Soap could take you from zero to a hero with the ladies. If you want to get successful with the ladies like yours truly, Glenn Lawrence, then I suggest that you order right now and get your own Tactical Soap from Grondike Soap Company today. Grondike Soap Company cannot guarantee that you will get a brunette and a blonde in the hot tub with you like Glenn Lawrence, but you may get a redhead.
Okay. And so now you have things like the guys grumbling and complaining because they're like, I worked my whole life for this. I provided everything, including the establishment of the household, like the tradcons want you to do. And they're mad about it.
Yep.
So that's the first part of the story. The other part that you need to understand about dowry is there's this thing called dowry and there's this thing called bride price.
Yes.
Renamed to bride
Two
wealth.
different- Two different
They're
things.
different. They are different, all right? And then if you go further back in the time, you have things like sister exchange, you have bride service, and then you have no marriage transaction, okay?
Mhm.
For most of human history, most societies have had some kind of marriage transaction at the time of marriage, okay? So
Yeah, and it was between the families. It was a union, a uniting of this household with
it
this
creates
household.
an alliance.
Yes, for
Well-
the benefit, not for the marriage so much, but for the benefit of the collective of the two clans or two families, right?
I will say this. Yes, that's true, but it's not an arbitrary agreement, meaning that it isn't just like, oh, the bride price is going to be this amount someday, or it's going to be way less someday. Typically what you see from the and this is why they renamed bride price to bride wealth. A bunch of anthropologists came together in the 60s, and after they did this gigantic, fact-finding mission where we got the World Ethnographic Atlas of 1,167 pre-industrial societies, where they looked at these and took data on all of them. They discovered that bride price isn't like you're just selling your daughter. It's not like a market rate. It's usually a uniform price within a bride price. So in any bride price societies, it's typically the same amount of money, okay? Because the way a bride price is supposed to work is you're supposed to pay a payment to their family, and they're supposed to now have enough to replace their daughter with another wife for another son in their family.
Yes.
And this is
'Cause
how
it's
you
like-
get polygyny also, right? Because everybody might be married in that family, but they'll say, okay, this person will have a second wife now. Usually in bride price paying societies, it'll be like one or a few things that they can use as a kind of currency for bride price. Like, that's where you get your
two
cow.
goats. I'll give you 2 goats.
Yeah, it'll be like a small herd of them or something like that. Now,
No.
what's-
She only gets 2 goats because look, she's missing her teeth. You got that one's missing teeth and she got a lazy eye. She's only worth 2 goats.
Well, that goes away from the uniformity of the situation. But okay, so bride wealth, bride price has happened in societies that were less sophisticated than dowry paying societies, okay? So the difference is the form of agriculture that they use. So in the Old Testament, you have the mohar mentioned a lot. That's the bride price.
Yes.
Dowry is arguably in there under words like shiluhim and zebed, but a lot less. It's by and large, it's bride wealth, okay? And that happens in societies where women actually give the larger contribution to agriculture, and men do less in agriculture. So when you get married and you take away this woman from her family, they are losing her very real labor value on the farm.
Yeah.
Because back then they were using lighter tools for agriculture that a woman could use in her hands. Then they switched to heavy agriculture, which was the plow. Okay. And with the plow, you can pretty much till acres and acres of land. And you have animals pulling this, but it was pretty much men who had to do the plow because it takes a lot of burst strength. You got to keep these animals in a straight line. And what happened is women's contribution on the field was not as economically important as it used to be. Okay, so because you're making all these calories now, another thing about bride wealth societies is that there isn't high earners versus low owners. People typically make around the same amount of money. And you see this in sub-Saharan Africa and all that stuff. But there isn't really private property, and there really isn't that much stratification of wealth, which means there isn't a guy who makes this much versus a middle class versus a poor. It's about the same. And most of the land, since they can't work the land enough, is held in corporate by the tribe, right? So it's not like my family owns this specifically and yours doesn't. It's the entire tribe owns this land in corporate, and everybody is free to work it or has some stake in the claim. Okay. When it switches over to the plow, you start to see all this money being made because you're able to make all this food. Not everybody has to worry about it, and you get specialization, and you start to get very rich men with a lot of land holdings, rich families, I should say. And then you start to get medium land holdings. Then you start to get minimum land holdings. Then you start to get a kind of proletariat class that owns no land. So you have rich to poor, okay, and you have private property ownership, and you have specialization and all these things. And what is born out of that is that bride wealth switches over to monogamy and the dowry system. So the dowry system walks hand in hand with monogamy, and bride wealth walks hand in hand in polygyny. So it's really these economic factors that led to this change. Okay, so now we have monogamy and dowry going through Europe for pretty much, almost 2,000 years until we get to, we want to do divorces again, and romantic love comes in because the economic system changes again, with industrialization. And now people start to look at things differently. They have a little bit more freedom in their environment in terms of how they're going to live. You get these mega cities where I can just go rent an apartment and just be a playboy out here, do whatever I want to do at the beginning of modernization. Then we get into no fault. My argument is that things are so expensive now, and we're heading back into this kind of situation. Like, you hear all these millennials complaining, I can't afford a house.
Yeah.
Blah, blah, blah. You got the trad cons yelling at men.
First-time home buyers now is 40 years old.
Yeah, and if the man, like the trad con says, needs to provide everything and she doesn't, you're going to miss taking advantage of this fertility window as far as a marriage is going. So I know it sounds crazy to say bring the dowry back, and I kind of joke about it, and I've even said I don't think we can, but I look back at this because I'm like, oh, if we need to establish a household with a man and a woman and we want to do it young, there needs to be some kind of very real material contribution from both sides in order to do that.
Especially, and you would say, like, wouldn't you say, like, because how like the father of the bride was responsible to pay for the wedding? Now, wouldn't that be like a form of dowry? Because like we, as the daughter or the father of the daughter that's getting married, we want her to be set up for success, and we are going to cover the expense and provide these wedding gifts that would help, start you guys off on your way. So since neither of these two would have household goods, these wedding gifts would be acting as household goods to help cover
to establish the household. And I've heard that before. It's not like this formal transfer. It's kind of this cultural remnant or carryover from what they were doing anyways, because the bride side, a typical dowry, and this is not for rich people, but for like middle income people, would have been a house, and the bride's father would have purchased a house for the family, which is kind of crazy to think about. They were even doing this.
That's wild.
They were doing this even into 1970s Greece. The dowry in Greece did not end until about the early 80s. So prior to that, they were still practicing the dowry system, which is kind of amazing because they were already one of the first to do it in ancient Athens, and it led that whole way down. But so, with that whole system, the bride's, family would do that. So I look at that as a kind of cultural carryover from those days. But the function of it, in some ways, depending on what, if it's just paying for an elaborate wedding that doesn't exactly establish a household, then it's missing the function of the dowry.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
more
but I mean,
about
I
just
guess I think the
celebrating something.
spirit of it is there, though. The fact
Yeah,
that like
yeah,
the responsibility was on the bride's
yeah.
family to make sure that the wedding and the things that they were started off on this marriage was secure, like with the gifts and like the function of it.
Yes, yes. In
You
some
know,
ways, in
yeah.
some ways, yes. You can say that. You can say that. For me, the real spirit of it lies in the negotiation prior to establishing the marriage. You know,
Mhm.
and
And would it, the fact that we don't have that now,
uh,
what we have done in a way, would you think that fathers have dropped the ball on their responsibility? They're not
it's
fulfilling their responsibility by not um
well, yes.
enforcing the dowry.
I will say yes, but I will add on that I don't want to just blame dads here. I don't want to put it all on men.
Well, no, but at the end of the
And I'm
day,
not saying
when
you're
it,
doing that. I'm not saying you're
yeah,
doing that. But from what I've read in the history, yeah, a lot of times, you know, the father would manage that, but the source of the dowry came from more than one place. Yeah, it would come from the father's work in a lot of places. You can say that. It would also come from the mother's side too, because she might have stuff left over from her own dowry or still there that would then
mhm,
contribute to the kids' pots. Grandma might come in and, you know, get a dowry going. It could come from the charity of the church. I have a newspaper article that talks about the Pope giving out dowries for women. It or it could come from women working themselves. So if you were in a poorer family, and that's the thing about the dowry, it was from top to bottom. It's not like just rich people. But what she might work as a maidservant in a richer family's house, and what
mhm.
the contract would be with that, they would pay her dowry once the contract term is over. So you see that a lot also. Women are now working, they're forced to work in order to save, because the reason I call dowry self-regulation is because what they're saying is if you're going to enter into this enterprise of marriage, you need
Yeah.
to prove you are able to have a household that has the health to sustain itself. If you don't have the commensurate dowry amount, this house has a very high chance of failing that you're trying to establish. Now we have a burden on the public because we have these kids here from a marriage that should have never happened, which sounds mean
And
to say.
no, but
But there
it's
would be
true
this
because then like
minimum of dowry, right? So
yeah,
dowries
like
can range from extremely extravagant in terms of cost if you have kings and queens getting married to a minimum amount for people that are, you know,
and it
peasants
was
or
more of
something.
an accountability factor. It was to make sure that they had skin in the game. That like
Exactly. It's
if you
contribution.
fail, it's going to cost you more than it's going to cost the state or the community.
Yes, and the thing about the dowry too was that one of the laws, typically if a separation did happen, say the marriage got annulled or a divorce, the woman's dowry was always her property. The husband just had management of it. If the divorce happened, they would have to pay the dowry back to her. She would go back to her house with that. If she committed adultery on him and they had children, then the
Mhm.
dowry would stay in that household. So it
With
was
him.
also an incentive against monkey branching, you can say, right? And then
Oh,
also, it's less for monkey branching would also have a less of a chance to work because if her dowry is invested in this household, why would this guy? It's not a rational decision to then take this dowerless woman here because you're
yeah,
throwing
because
away your
he
marriage
doesn't have
prospects basically.
yeah, he doesn't get any potential insurance clause in
Yeah.
case she acts, she misbehaves or she acts up.
Yes. Yes.
Because if she's
Exactly.
willing to, because it also be like if she's willing to cheat on him
Mhm.
and jeopardize losing this dowry, I'm not going to be getting a dowry if I stay with her because
Yeah, if
and
I
and and
choose if I choose romantic love and screw my family and her and I
yeah,
both love each other, that's great. You know, that is the romantic ethos. That is the lust kind of love. That is the fantasy story of love. That is not the familial love, just to
yeah.
differentiate types of love. That's the her on a pedestal and me having to give
That's
her
the
the world
limerence.
kind of
That's the
love.
horniness. That's that.
Yes, and we see that after a few years, the love tends to go away, and that even nowadays we see that. That's where we get the "I'm not happy, I'm bored."
I need to
That's where
find
we get the love
myself.
doctors. How do I get it going again? All these things, but when both people have a mutual respect and the proof is there from the mutual contribution from both spouses, it's different. So the reason this is so interesting to me is because I've seen a ton of divorce judgments. I used to look at it. My job was to look at this calculator for 5 years, which looked at one person's side and the other parent's side. and spit out this money and see what the assets were and see what alimony was. Then when I saw this system, it looked very elegant to me because it made so much sense. It's not a hypergamous system. It's a balanced scales, and it makes everything worth it. It's like, it's a respect to the husband. You know, it's like, okay, you're going to be the provider, which I'm not even arguing against. But what we're going to do is we're going to put some fertilizer and water on you so you can be the best provider you can possibly be.
Yeah, like we're going to try to set you up for success.
Yes, and you're going to respect your wife because of what she did, especially in the beginning and what she brought in. This is going to create an alliance of the families. Another interesting thing that I've seen in the literature and the writings here is that in older times, women who got married needed a dowry, and if they didn't have one, that wasn't considered a wife. That was a concubine, essentially.
Yes.
That's the difference. And now a concubine, you can say, is a marketplace of paying for a woman. You can say this concubine cost this much or that much or whatever it is.
If you want to watch the rest of this episode, go subscribe to our Patreon now.
Energy of truth on fire. They're calling out the world's desire. From fake ideals to moral decay, they're lighting up the modern age. No one's safe, not the church, not fame. They're flipping the